Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Munro. I'm the Executive Director of the Alice Austen House. We are at a historic house, one of 23 historic sites in New York City, but we're very, very special. We're a nationally designated site of LGBTQ history. And we are a photographic museum that is dedicated to the truthful interpretation of the life and work of Victorian photographer Alice Austen. I'm not going to say too much more about our site because I think that that will be really revealed by tonight's panel, which our focus is on the work of Kelli Connell, her Double Life series, which is a 20-year project. So this evening, we're joined by three incredibly special people. So of course we have Kelli Connell with us tonight, our speaking artist who also had an incredible landmark show at the Alice Austen House this year, marking the 20th year of her project with her model, Kiba Jacobson, who you will also see on your screen. Hi, Kiba. And I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves very briefly. We also have with us tonight Hannah Fraser, who is the director of the Centre for Photography at Woodstock. And we're so fortunate that the gallery in Woodstock was able to have Kelli's show travel there, and it's currently on until the end of November. And of course, that's an incredibly different space, and Hannah can speak to that. So we have a really good showing of participants this evening. And what I'm going to do is I'm opening it up this evening with a tiny video, which gives us a glimpse into Kelli's process working with Kiba. And we've got to remember, these two have been working together for 20 years. And we were so honored at the Alice Austen House to have Kelli come and visit and install with me and our other curator. Please remember to mute yourselves as you come in. Paul Moakley, who's also watching this panel this evening. So Kelli got to experience working in the Alice Austen House and then returned with Kiba this year to create new photographs. And so if you'll just allow me to share for a moment a glimpse of this work. I'm just going to take it back.
Well, she was kind of mad, wasn't she? And then we wanted we've taken a lot of those. Yeah, mad or concerned. Like, this person just gave you some bad news. Okay. And your reactions to bad news. Now you're coming like this. Okay, good. Those blue earrings look great with the blue color. Oh, go here. That's good. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Oh, Kiba, this is gonna be a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
So you just got to see a little sneak peek into what is the newest work. And what I would like to do now is hand over the reins to Kelli to show us the work that she presented at the Alice Austen House, and that I had the opportunity to handle, hang, and talk to her so much more about, which was incredibly exciting for me because I've been following Kelli's work for many, many years before I became executive director of the Alice Austen House. So thank you, Kelli, if you'd like to share your screen.
Everyone, can you guys see my screen right now? Okay, let's see, just a second. Okay, here we go. Okay, is that good? Okay, great. So I'm just incredibly honored to be here with you all. It's actually a little overwhelming. I didn't expect this, but seeing all the names pop up, there's so many people I've known for, 20 years total. Susan K. Grant, my main professor at Texas Women's University, is here. Hi, Susan. I'm so happy to have you here. And George Slade's name popped up. He was an early supporter of Double Life early on. And there's just so many people in the room that I feel just really a little bit overwhelmed, but so grateful to have you guys in my life and to support this work. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the slides. The great part about tonight is that Kiba is here with me, and she's actually never been on a panel before. So it's really special to have her here. So we started working on this series in 2002. And at the time I had just recently moved to Denton, Texas. And I was questioning my own sexuality. Like, I had been married before for a few years, and then I found myself attracted to women as well as men. I ended up leaving my husband and then went to graduate school. And then a few years later, I started this work. And what I liked when I first saw these very first pictures, where we have what appears to be two women in a relationship, is that by having the same one model play both roles, that one person could take on multiple sides of the self or multiple sides of their identity. And so in many ways, this work was me trying on what it was like for two women to play the roles in a relationship, when I had been so used to, in popular culture or TV, seeing relationships portrayed in a certain way. So this image is called Convertible Kiss. It's one of the earliest ones that we have, that we made. And Kiba was such a great model for this from the very beginning. And the two of us met when we were in undergraduate school. So we knew each other, but we weren't that close. Like, we were in a couple photography classes. We'd see each other at a few parties, but we didn't know each other that well. And when I moved back to Denton, Kiba happened to be there, and I just asked if she would model for this project. And both of us had no idea it would last as long as it did. And it's been pretty incredible that she's been invested in the project so long. And what's so great there's many things great about working with Kiba, but one thing is that she understands photography, that background in photography, where I have the camera set up on a tripod. Most of the time I run in as a stand-in and will be there with her, acting out the other character. And because she understands what I'm doing behind the camera, we just act. There's a great chemistry between us, and we can act things out. And she can also look in the viewfinder, understand what I'm doing, and then we just go from there. She's also somewhat of a chameleon. I feel like Kiba's just such a free spirit and really open with herself to take on these multiple roles, and to really take my direction and to listen to what I'm after in the pictures and to just go for it and take that on. I would say she's just as much an active part of this work as I am, and I'm just like the choreographer, director, behind the scenes that comes up with what we're doing, but her energy and what she might get out of it as a contribution by being a model is such a big part of this work. This image here is called At the Howdy Doody, and it was actually edited out early on, but I just think it's hilarious. And it's even funnier now because there's no phones like that. It's really rare. So a little bit about our working process. Usually I keep a sketchbook with many ideas that usually span from my own personal life, and whatever's going on in my relationships at the time. I think a lot about the self evolving over time too, and how I am actually a different person when I'm with my brother or my mom or Betsy, my wife, and how we take on these different sides of ourselves depending on who we're with. But I just make notes in my sketchbook. I'll also read a lot and get inspiration from movies or looking at magazines. And when I meet with Kiba, we spend quite a bit of time working on the props that we're going to use, looking through all the clothes she has, my clothes, anything we've bought specifically for shoots. And then we spend quite a bit of time location scouting, but we also always include extra items just in case. So this image here called Carnival was made on the fly. We had extra clothes in our bag and we were traveling from one location to another and saw this mall parking lot carnival in Benton, and I immediately pulled over and we made these photographs there. This was one of the more complicated images to make in Photoshop because the sun was setting. And usually if the lighting is controlled and the light hasn't changed that much, it's not that complicated for post-production work. I often think that my images lie as documents, but tell truths as images. Like greater internal truths. I am creating fictions, so there's never been two people in the same room at the same time, as in this image called The Valley. But I'm after an emotional response that really resonates, that I hope follows through to how the viewers see the work. This image is called Looking Glass, made from 2008. And yeah, this one's a little bit more meta with the negatives there. That I used to shoot film, so you see some of my film over to the side. I would shoot with a medium Pentax 6.7 camera on a tripod. And normally I would shoot one roll of film of Kiba dressed one way, get through at least 1 to 2 rolls, and then she would change clothes, or I would change clothes too if I was the stand-in, and then we'd shoot 1 to 2 rolls of her dressed another way. It actually wasn't until last year that I purchased a medium format digital camera, and it's been pretty incredible to work with. So over time, Kiba and I have been together as things in our life have changed. So like she's been there for my marriage and I've been there for her marriage. We both been there during hard times when we've lost family members that have been close to us. So it's pretty incredible that it's photography that's the cornerstone, or like the key thing that keeps us together. Normally we photograph once or twice a year. Now that I live in Chicago and Kiba still lives in Denton, I will either travel there and stay for a few days to make work, or she'll come here and we'll make work together. Working at the Alice Austen House, it was one of the few times that we made work not in the places where we lived. And it was such an honor to work at a place where two women lived together at a time when same-sex marriages were not recognized. These later images, I was trying to push a very different emotional tone to the work than you saw in the earlier images. The earlier images might be more flirty, or people are just meeting. There's more sexual tension. These images are more about a relationship unfolding over time. And then there are other images in the series that talk about a woman's body changing over time. So I do have several nudes of Kiba as she's in her 40s. And when we both get into our 50s, I think it's really important that we represent her, and that I continue to make this work as long as Kiba's interested, because there's not that many representations of female bodies in our in the history of art. This image was made in Chicago, actually at the Aqua Blue Hotel, those of you that know that space. And then this image was made the day before everything shut down for the pandemic. So Kiba had come to Chicago, and we were actually doing a podcast at the Museum of Contemporary Photography on Friday morning. This image was photographed on Thursday, and it was such a strange and surreal scene to walk. As we're walking to make this photograph, we're walking down a street where Loyola University is, and on the one side of the street, there's polo players and a lot of people playing on a field, like so many college students just hanging out and having a great time. And then on the other half of the street, there were students with U-Hauls, and their parents were there packing up their belongings, moving them from the dorms. Many of them were crying and like holding on to each other and had their cell phones in their hand and just looked completely bewildered. And at that time, we didn't know what was going to happen. But for me, this is one of the last times that I hugged someone that was a super close friend. So the next morning we did the podcast, and then we took a few more pictures. And by that time we knew that everything was shutting down, and we got her on a flight to leave immediately that day. And then the next time we've made work together was actually at the Alice Austen House. So it was really quite an honor to be able to make work in this space. And this is also the first show that I've ever had that was in a house museum. And I think because my work has a more domestic feel, or many of the images are taken indoors, just to be in this space where the energy of Alice and Gertrude and her friends was just absolutely incredible. I really loved seeing the work displayed in this home, and to be able to walk around the gardens and just know what it was like to be out and see the river and the greater Staten Island, walk into a house and be immersed in this exhibition. I guess I'll turn it over to you, Victoria, to talk about these next slides.
Thanks so much, Kelly. It's always so great to hear you talk about your process with Kiba. Being able to live around this work for the 3-month exhibition was absolutely phenomenal. I love curating. You've gone to a different kind of screen, Kelly.
Sorry.
I can share it if you like.
Oh, wait, I think it's going to go back. Sorry about that. Here we go.
Oh, you're fine. As Kelly was saying, this is actually a domestic setting. We have these two kind of galleries that are set up to showcase work. So they are very, white and as airy as possible, but you still have these domestic features in the galleries, these home closets and fireplaces and such. So we use a very old-fashioned, old school, model of the gallery to be able to try and work out how we're going to put these exhibitions together. And a lot of people might have thought that, oh, you'd naturally put it in a chronological order, but that didn't feel like it was going to sit right for these galleries. So there was just natural groupings of works that sat really beautifully in the space. And this room that you see in this current photograph, this was Alice's bedroom. And so, you've got this parlor room, which is the first gallery where Alice photographed so many of her friends, but she also photographed her interiors extensively. This house was one of Alice's primary muses, but so were her friends. And what struck me so much about Kelli's photography, this sort of collaborative process with directing Kiba, was there was all these ties to Alice's photographs. And I wanted to make sure that I showed you a few of Alice's works too, for context. So Alice was born in 1866. And she, of course, was a privileged white woman, and socialized with a similar group. But these women, part of this privilege allowed them to do this, but these women were real trailblazers. They broke all the rules. They did not behave according to Victorian norms necessarily. And they pursued technological inventions, driving in cars, riding bicycles, all of these different things. And Alice did this really, I think, important thing, and she created these safe spaces for her and her friends to be by making clubs. And Kelli mentioned the gardens at the Alice Austen House. These were also a playground for Alice and her friends. So this image here is called the Darned Club, and they were named such because they did not allow men in their group. And we can go to the next one. And what you can see is that Alice is really directing her friends. And this photograph actually exists. I didn't put both versions in two versions where she switches the couple around. And the woman in the dark clothing is Violet Ward, who actually wrote Bicycling for Ladies in 1896. And Alice Austen took all the photographs for that book that became the illustrations in the garden. And her model for those was actually her partner at the time, Daisy Elliott. That was before she'd met Gertrude Tate, who would be the love of her life. We can go to the next. Somebody's
nice.
needs to mute. Thank you. So I said, look, Alice did have all these pursuits, and she photographed them and posed her friends in and around the house, also sometimes in other locations when they were holidaying. But the house was really this point of, she would use the architecture to frame out her photos and such. And then there's just so much fun, like Alice called it the larky life. And there's also photographs that slightly document her process. So we know here that Alice is taking this photograph with one camera, but there's another camera on lawn. So she worked with multiple cameras on any one day. And you see the view here, which is looking straight out to Manhattan.
Sorry.
So her ability to compose was incredibly strong. And that's all right. We can go to the masked photo. And there's a lot of framing going on, which you see in Kelli's compositions where she's working out these pieces. I just think it's so extraordinary what comes out of these final edits, bringing the two Kibas together from multiple photographs. And then we'll show you really quickly, Kelli will show you a few of the photographs that actually were produced at the Alice Austen House.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it was really incredible being in this space. just knowing that Alice and her friends helped pave the way for artists like me. I came from a really small town in Texas, and truthfully, like I had not been exposed to a single queer relationship, or if I was unaware. So just tracing back like my upbringing and everything that led to making these pictures, I'm just so grateful for the experience to make work that honors another woman, and a woman who really created kind of a haven here in Staten Island for people who were queer. This is Kiba and I in the garden. Paul Moakley, who's here, he does an amazing job with these gardens. They're absolutely just breathtaking. And then this is the image that you all saw in the film. This one's called Morning Tea. And then Victoria told me that many of Alice's pictures utilize a triangle in their composition. So I really wanted to do something with that. Here, both figures are looking out at the Staten Island Ferry as it passes by. And then this is a slight riff off of that mast image. I love the title of Alice's mast image because it mentions it's mentioned that they are masked and that they have on short skirts. Both of those things were not okay for women to do at the time, or they, were more taboo. So this image is kind of like after things are okay. But I still like how mysterious in tone this image was. And I was able to make the work in both the gallery downstairs and in the garden. And then Paul lives in the place, and it was really pretty amazing that Paul let us shoot in his apartment. It gets this really gorgeous morning light that we were able to use in this photograph here, and then also in this one right here. In this last image I'll share, I'm still working on a few more composites, but this one right here is pretty directly referenced from Alice's earlier image, but I've updated the American flag with a contemporary LGBTQ flag. So thank you so much. I think I'll quit sharing and we can go from there.
Thanks so much, Kelly. It's just so exciting to see those new images. And I'd love to hear Kiba talk a little bit about this process and some of the 20-year experience, and also making this work while your show was also up at the Alice Austen House.
Sure. That opportunity was very unique, and I don't know, it's just very monumental, kind of, I don't know, it puts it in a different perspective for me, the work. So it was really joyous to undertake, and I had a great time doing that. Kelly, I don't know if you saw my my little chat about the bed picture.
No, I didn't.
So,
no. Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah. Just a little side note there. There's a lot of images Kelly doesn't include, later on. One of them, a couple of them, there was one that was called the Three Graces, where they're all in bed together. And there were actually three of them. But she doesn't show that because it doesn't portray to the relationships of two individuals. And so it didn't really fit but that was when you were more experimenting with multiple Kibas. I remember there's one that was like a tent one where there were three, we were camping. And I just thought that was really interesting because I had seen some of the Alice Austen images, but I hadn't seen that bed one. So it was when she showed that, Tori, when you showed that, I was like, that's really reminiscent of the Three Graces. I think that's what you titled it. I don't know because you don't show it. So
Yeah,
But
actually, what you're bringing up, Kiba, too, is so Kiba's been around this whole time, and there are periods of this work that I've edited out. There was a whole section of this work that I worked on for over a year, where Kiba was pregnant with her son Alec. And so in those composites, they show Kiba completely pregnant and beautiful, and then me in the other images from the neck down. And then what happened was once her baby Alec was born, her son, I just felt like the work for me, it was turning into something I couldn't speak about. I'm not a mom. I still don't have kids, and the work comes from a really true place, and I felt like I was in uncharted territory for myself. And so at that point, I had to make the decision if all of those images, which I'm sure you can still find some on the internet, because at that time, the internet was relatively new and we weren't paying attention to what was out there and what would happen with it. But anyway, there's a whole section of images that are out, but yeah. So
yeah, so this being kind of more the images that Kelli shot at the Alice Austen House, were different than, like I said, kind of more like had this kind of historic and a little bit more, I don't know how to put it. I guess a monumental would be a good term. And that it was highlighting and also giving tribute to Alice Austen through the images, but turning them contemporary and making them in a new way, recreating kind of some of the ones that she had shot. So that to me was really interesting. There, usually Kelli has her, like she was saying, her sketchbook, and she's got some ideas kind of planned, but it wasn't ever before someone else's work that we were, shooting, like recreating in a new way. So that was very unique, and I found it very rewarding shooting those images. What else? What do y'all?
well, maybe I can ask Hannah too, because actually Hannah Frazier, the executive director from the Center for Photography Woodstock, she's been there from the beginning as well. Hannah and I were in graduate school at the same time when I started this work, and Susan K. Grant was our main professor. So Hannah was there probably in the very first critiques where I was, putting work up for the first time, receiving feedback, that whole grad school experience from the get-go. So thank you, Hannah, for being here tonight and for taking this show to CPW.
Thank you, Kelli. Well, absolutely. I mean, what I remember first, I mean, of course, being a peer of Kelli's also, I saw the very, very different versions of these photographs when, like, I felt it was more like tarot cards, seeing these two, like all these different versions. How about this person with this person, and what? And yet, in the final stitched together image, I saw it's a amalgamate. It's like it's this final thing that you don't even question. I mean, it's like so I was really fascinated by that. It's just what happens in the final image, even when you've seen all these different versions, like makes it completely forget all of that. It's all about that final moment, and it was really amazing to see. And of course, I have to say, Texas Women's University, and just with another nod to Susan K. Grant, I saw was just a magical place where you could experiment and be safe, take risks, and then do crazy things. And at the beginning, some of the things that Kelli was trying seemed like where is she going? And yet it's like, and yet it was such a clear path, and just a really amazing thing to see now for 20 years.
Hannah, I wondered, I know you didn't see the show at the Alice Austen House in person, but certainly we have virtual tours that you saw. And we were talking briefly before we started this panel about how this show feels now in the center's galleries. And I wondered if you could speak to that, like how you feel that it's different and the way that it kind of functions in a completely different space.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'd love to talk about that, especially since, I mean, I loved seeing the exhibition through the Matterport and the virtual walkthrough, which is still available for your space, Victoria. And then of course it's also available for ours. So people actually have the opportunity to see these two completely different experiences for these exhibitions. Now, while ours is a gallery setting with, you know, beautiful tall ceilings and what also, this is also, it's like this is a 225-year-old building that was once a barn, was once, you know, the place where you parked the local hearse, and has this crazy history. It's music cafe that most people know the building for. Bob Dylan used to walk here, and now you've got Kelli or rather Kiba on the walls here. And so it goes to full stretch or so. It's you know, very different feel because of the tall ceilings. It's like there's a more, like maybe a more formal quality in it or so, but very different pace. And it was a lot of fun playing around with these images. Kelli, you probably still notice from me. So it's like I have little tiny printouts of all of each of the photos to see where in the gallery would place it or so, which is very much in the way I like my modus operandi, is like how I like to do things or so. And then of course, then once the pieces arrived, we got to move them around to create that different feel. So and that show is still, of course, on view. It's on view through November 27th.
Thanks so much for that. I'm going to interject some of our discussion with questions that are coming in from the floor. And I have a question from a photography student for you, Kelli, who's wondering about the digital process, and what they're concerned about is whether or not you've had reactions or pushbacks in the art world, particularly the photographic world, to actually using manipulated images and utilizing software to do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So as far as the work being created in Photoshop and being a digital manipulation, I think because the work looks so believable, it looks like it's a documented scene of two people in a relationship, and you can't really tell the Photoshop. I'm trying my best to hide that as best as I can. So when people first encounter the work, it's not the Photoshop part that hits them. And for me, it's the emotional tone that's set and what I'm trying to say about relationships and the self that I hope comes to the hit that starts the conversation. And then later, once people realize it's the same person in each scene, that then they might realize it's Photoshop. But truthfully, I've never had anyone question the Photoshop aspects. I mean, I guess I've received some questions about trickery or tricking people and what that trick might mean. But for me, if there is an element of trickery, it's more that we have one conceived idea about someone or some relationship. And then once you figure out what I'm doing in the work, it shifts and changes and we see it new, which I'm really interested in, because we do that as people. Anytime we meet another person, we think something very quickly about them, and it may, you know, you might be surprised to find out something else, or that you were carrying around your stereotypes and that was the filter you were looking through. So I'm hoping that the work can create a sense of self that's much more fluid with relationships and with sexuality. In the art world, I haven't been questioned in the art world about the Photoshop, but I have been questioned in the art world about the work as far as portraying Kiba as she's getting older, which I'm getting older too. But I did, one gallery dealer earlier on was just really questioning whether the work would sell after Kiba turned a certain age. So I think I was feeling pressure at that moment to not work on this work any longer. And I really had to do some soul searching to figure out if I should continue. So naturally, I started experimenting and making other work. And I have another project that I've been working on, 2 other projects that I'm working on now. And then I just decided, you know what, it's really important. This work's super important to me. I really enjoy doing it. As long as Kiba's interested and excited, we'll just go forward. And it's okay if the work isn't shown but every 4 or 5 years, so that we do just let what I need to say about relationships and the self take the time it needs for me to learn from my own relationship, and for our bodies to change and to celebrate that. So yeah, that's the pushback I've gotten from the art world was more about that, not the Photoshop.
Which I think, you know, to me, when you told me that, I could not even fathom thinking like that. Like for me, when I contacted you, you know, kind of cold called you to ask if you would be interested in having an exhibition at the Alice Austen House, and you said, well, it's actually the 20-year anniversary of, you know, creating this work. And, you know, that was just what was so phenomenal for me, that we were going to see this process, that this was going to be represented, and what does it mean to work with one model for 20 years, and the beauty in that. And you know, sometimes, since when I first was introduced to your work was by discovering your book, Double Life, in a bookstore, probably around about the year that it was published. And I bought it instantaneously because I was just like, what is this? This is amazing. I just was so excited about the work. And when you agreed to do the show, a lot of the things that I wanted to ask you about was this process of, you know, not just working with one model for 20 years, but actually representing an aging body, and how important that is. We have a new question in the chat, and I'm very glad that some of our attendees are asking questions. They said, can you talk a little bit more about gender presentations, especially in the earlier work? There were different clothes only to differentiate between 2 people, or did they purposely represent different gender presentations?
Yeah, so I was really interested in that time about how our clothing forms our identity, and it's still the same way, how we wear our hair, what clothes we wear, if we have tattoos or not, all of that are things that we use to you know, create our identity. So when I first found myself attracted to women, I didn't know how to function in this new world of, like, I look super straight. If I'm in a grocery store or at a cafe or, you know, even at a gay bar, how will someone know that I'm interested in them? Because I really don't look queer. I had super short hair at the time, but I started to just pay attention, especially at gay bars or at places where 2 women were talking to one another, where I knew they were in a queer relationship, just trying to learn the code. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to dress more masculinely, or wear a baseball cap or a wife beater t-shirt. Like, I was just trying to learn all of this. But then I started to think about how I've always been uncomfortable with labels and how relationships have been described to be a certain way, or even if you say that someone's masculine, what masculine looks like, or feminine. So why can't someone who's feminine present masculinely? So it's just like, it's been really interesting. I think there's a lot to talk about there, but in the earlier images, I would have either one figure dressed more masculine and one more feminine, but sometimes both of them would be dressed feminine. Sometimes both would be dressed masculine. So I was trying to create work that wasn't always polar identities, to where one's masculine, one's feminine all the time. Sometimes they both were feminine, but that was definitely part of the earlier work, and it is part of the work now. But I think we're in a time in our culture where you know, I mean, I know from teaching, a lot of the students I have are much more fluid in their gender representation, and it's less polarized.
Yeah, I think it's also, I think it's interesting to Kiba as a teacher. You're a teacher. I'm still teaching, but am an ex-high school teacher. I think teaching also influences definitely my work and my approach to things. And my daughter's in 8th grade, and her Gender Sexuality Alliance, they just started it 2 weeks ago, and they have 40 students at intermediate.
Amazing. Yeah,
And
that's incredible.
It is amazing to see the freedoms that the kids or they're wanting to express. And so we're at a really important moment, and this work stays incredibly important. For now, it can speak to generations, which I think is really interesting. Someone in the chat did ask, Kelli, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit to a couple of, or your current project, which this is a current project, but what other project you're working on right now? Yeah, sure. So I've been working on this body of work since 2014 called Pictures for Karis. And it's actually about Karis Wilson and her relationship with Edward Weston and the time they were together from 1934 to 1945. So it traces their relationship from start to finish. And I just became completely interested in Karis as a person, not Karis as a model. And of course, because I've worked with Kiba over a really long period of time, I've always been interested in other photographers that work with one model over a long period of time. So Edward Weston photographing his second wife, Karis, is an example of that. But I bought a book called California in the West that was published in 1940, and it has 96 pictures by Edward and 11 chapters of text by Karis. And it was her writing that I got, you know, really enthralled with. I realized she has this amazing sense of humor, and she's just hilarious and really witty. And I just wanted to learn more about her. So the more I read about her and the more I learned about her, and then eventually I traveled to the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson, where her archives are kept and Edward's archives are kept. And I started to do a deeper dive into that archive. I just knew that there was a potential for a body of work there. So in 2014, I traveled with Betsy, my wife, to the places where Edward and Karis made work together and lived. And I've made 4x5 black and white landscape images, as well as portraits of Betsy in those locations. And then I've also included portraits of Betsy that were made prior to us ever going on these trips. And then in addition to that, I realized through all the research that I had done that a written component was needed. So I'm working on a book now, and it has it's really long, as far as like there's 11 to 12 chapters of text with my images interspersed with Edward Weston's images of Karis.
But it's really about trying to honor Karis and keep her first, and to just think about how through the history of photography, how different photographers get framed or positioned by art historians and critics. Edward was talked about very differently in the 1930s compared to the 60s, compared to the 80s. And then now, looking back through the lens of her, I'm really interested in what that is. So that's one project. And then the second one I'll talk about super fast. It's a collaboration with Natalie Crick, and it's called Oh Man. And we just started it 1 year ago, and it's actually riffing off of Edward Steichen's book, The Family of Man. So, and actually all of Steichen's work, we're using as source material. So we're hoping to make a book that uses almost the exact color, but shifted and erasing everything except for that oh man instead of family of man. But it's been really fun working with Natalie. And as far as Photoshop skills go, she's like, just blows me away. But yeah, so those are different looks at using, being inspired by work in our photo history and talking about it in a contemporary lens.
Thank you. And I'm excited to see more of it. There's a question that came in for Kiba, and she was answering it in the chat, but everyone else would like to hear. It was the question was, Kiba, do you feel you've been playing the same characters all this time?
So not the same two characters, although I will say, I don't know, Kelly, if you realized that you did this earlier, but you called one of the Kibas you earlier in the discussion in the garden, because you say there's Kiba and me in the garden or whatever. Because a lot of times when she's directing me, she's like, this is me, like I'm that person. And so now you're being me, or now you're Kelly, you're, and so it's interesting that kind of that duality. But as far as it being like two in particular people or two, not really, because I think it just depends on the emotion that Kelly's wanting to capture as to that other role of the other person. So it's more ambiguous as far as like it not being a particular person, but she'll just direct me in that sense of like, now you're me. I think because maybe in your mind, Kelly, you're trying to be like, okay, so this is this person, now you're, and I think a lot of times you might be able to relate more with one of the people in the image more as you, because sometimes you do direct me that way. But as far as it being like the same person over time or the same two people, not really. I don't feel like I'm.
Yeah, there's not two people that we're following. It's like based on many different people and many relationships I've been with. So Kiba's right. Sometimes one of the people she's acting out is based on me and the other one's someone else. But sometimes it's completely based on a fiction or, a tear from a magazine. And I just saw Ross asked Kiba, yeah, this is a great question. And it's fascinating because he's asking, do you think the pictures are of you? And I love that question because it's when this work is on the wall, and if Kiba's at an art opening, they think they're self-portraits. So they immediately go talking to Kiba because they think they are self-portraits made by her. And she's playing a character, and I'll let you talk more about this, Kiba, because it is the representation of you. It's your likeness. I mean, it looks like you, and it's your body and yourself. But do you see any part of yourself in this work? Because I know if I was going to take your portrait, if I was going to spend time taking pictures of you as you, they would be really different for me.
Right. So the image of the masks with the cigarette, the recreation.
Yeah.
It was interesting because I just actually saw that one today for the first time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my tattoo. And on the ankle, because like typically, like I don't
Photoshop that out. Sorry.
Usually I don't identify the images as me. but it has been, I think, brought up here more recently as a more cohesive body of work, in its entirety, starts to speak about me aging, or just the female. I feel like it's just like a general, like a female's aging, not just like me aging. The ones, of course, with me pregnant, and the ones where a couple of them, you had Alec in the picture, those I can identify more with as portraits of myself, because it's got my son in them, or my belly that's like massive. But the other ones, I do kind of take the liberty to use it as like almost a, Kelli got me a little necklace. I should have worn it to the thing. Dang it, Kelli, I didn't wear it. She got me a 20th anniversary necklace that says Muse on it. Usually I take the liberty of Kelli's direction to just kind of embellish and kind of just embrace like me being able to be whoever Kelli kind of wants me to be. And it's kind of very liberating. And also it has, I mean, I feel very just extremely grateful for the opportunity, but because it's a very creative outlet for myself to fulfill that role. So I don't know if that helped that answer the question, but I don't think that they're me, no. I don't look at them.
And I think we've just got time for one more question that came in, and I don't know if everyone could see really clearly that short video that I played at the very beginning of Kelli and Kiba working together. But this question says, the series has always felt naturally intimate and familiar to me. Do you both talk and chat while you're making the work, or are there moments of quiet similar to the images?
Yeah, that's a good point. We do talk and chat quite a bit. And I think there are some moments of stillness, but the images themselves give off a much more quiet and still an emotional tone that I think is more resonant to my personality in the end, than what our experience was making them. It's much more active, and we're much more, talking to each other and laughing about stuff. And sometimes Kiba has to hold a pose for so long that's uncomfortable, and the picture itself doesn't look uncomfortable whatsoever. And it's really fun when we know a picture has worked. Kiba will get really excited, and we'll both just know that we've done something. Even before when we were shooting film, we could tell when one was going to work. So they definitely feel more active and fun, but the way that they end up is more based on, I think, how my own self reflects. So in a way, they seem more like portraits of me, even though I'm using her as a stand-in. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, the three of you, for joining me tonight. Like Hannah said, we both have tours, and I know that Lee Donlan posted in the chat a link to the tour at the new installation for you all to see. It's been so enjoyable seeing your faces again and meeting you here tonight, Hannah. Thank you, and I hope that we can revisit this in 5 years.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Thanks, Hannah. Kiba, great to see you. I'll send you the finished work. Send you
Yeah. Victoria, nice to see you again too.
Nice to see you. Have a lovely evening.